struggling widower rancher, saved two settler girls. Next day their mother came with an offer he never expected. The wind had a voice that morning, low and bitter, speaking through the gaps in the pine boughs like it meant to warn a man off the open land. Adam Mercer had ridden out anyway. Early spring in these high hills still carried snow deep as a saddle stirrup in the shaded places, and fence posts vanished under drifts where the wind had swept it fine as sifted flour. His mare's breath plumed white in the cold air, each exhale curling back against his leg before breaking apart. He had been tracking a loose strand of wire along his northern pasture when it happened, a sound so sharp it cracked through the stillness, not the cry of any bird or the bark of a fox, but something higher, human, threaded with panic. A child's scream. Adam's heart lurched hard enough to make him forget the cold in his fingers. He turned the mare with a pressure of his knee and spurred her toward it, snow spraying up around them like breaking surf. The cry came again, thinner this time, and he caught sight of movement near a tangle of scrub oak half buried in snow. At first, he thought it was a fox worrying at some trap game. Then he saw the shape of two small figures pressed back against the twisted branches, faces pale against the shadows. Between them and the open field were two coyotes, ribs showing under their patchy fur, ears flattened, hackles up. Hunger had made them bold. Adam didn't think. He swung down before the mare had fully stopped, his boots sinking to the ankle in cold powder. His rifle came up smooth, the leather strap creaking. One sharp report split the air. The nearest coyote yelped and vanished into the white. The other hesitated, teeth bared, then bolted after its mate. Silence dropped heavy, broken only by the ragged breathing of the girls. He lowered the rifle and stepped forward slowly. The older one, maybe 6, had her arms thrown wide around the smaller, as if she could cover her with nothing but will. The little one clung to her, eyes round, cheeks flushed raw from cold and fear. "You hurt." Adam's voice came out quieter than he'd meant, rough from disuse. The older girl shook her head, but didn't loosen her grip. The younger sniffled, the sound small in the wide cold. "Come on," he said. "It's too cold to be out here." They hesitated until he held out his gloved hand. It was the little one who reached first, her mitten slipping into his palm. He lifted her up into the saddle, then took the older under the arms and set her behind. They sat stiff and silent, their weight feather-light against the mare's flank. Adam gathered the reins and started back, keeping his body between them and the wind. The ride was long. The snow half melted in places, so that water seeped through the mare's hooves into black earth. The girls didn't speak. Once, the older one looked past him toward the trees, her jaw tight, as if she expected the coyotes to return. Adam's cabin came into view against the slope, a low shape of weathered logs, smoke curling thin from the chimney. He swung down, lifted the younger into his arms, and helped the elder clamber down. Inside, warmth met them in a soft rush. The fire was banked but steady. The air scented faintly with pine resin and old coffee grounds. He set the little one on a chair by the hearth. She sat hunched, watching him with a kind of open, unguarded gaze. The older girl remained standing, her back straight, eyes wary. Adam fetched a quilt from the bed and wrapped it around both, the fabric swallowing their small shoulders. Their clothes were damp to the knee. He could feel the chill in their skin. "Got broth left from last night," he said, more to fill the quiet than anything. He ladled steaming liquid into 2 tin mugs and set them before the girls. The younger cupped hers in both hands, blowing across the surface. The elder lifted hers slow, as though waiting for permission. When they had eaten enough to bring some color back to their faces, Adam crouched beside them. "Where's your folks?" The older's eyes shifted to the window, where the wind worried the eaves. "Mama will come," she said after a moment. Her voice was steady, but there was something in it, like she was saying it to herself as much as to him. He didn't press. Whatever had brought them out alone in this weather could wait until warmth and food had done their work. He stoked the fire higher, the orange light painting their cheeks. Outside, the light began to fail early, as it always did when the sky carried more snow. As the evening deepened, the girls grew drowsy. Adam spread a folded blanket on the floor near the hearth and laid them down side by side. The younger slipped into sleep almost at once, her fist curled in the quilt. The older lay awake longer, her eyes fixed on the flames as if memorizing them. Only when he was sure they slept did Adam ease back into the rocker, listening to the ticking of the stove and the faint whistle of wind around the chinks in the wall. In the dark hours, he dreamed of the sound of that first scream, how it had sliced through the cold, sharp enough to pull a man out of his own thoughts. He woke before dawn, the fires glowed down to embers, and fed it carefully until it flared. The girls were still sleeping when the knock came, a soft but deliberate rap on the door. Adam's hand found the rifle by instinct, though he left it resting against the jamb as he unbarred the latch. The woman standing there was young, but worn in a way that had nothing to do with years. Early light silvered the edges of her hair, which had fallen loose from a knot at her nape. A scarf, faded and frayed, was pulled tight around her neck. Her coat was patched, the hem damp with frost. Her cheeks were flushed from cold, her lips pale. But it was her eyes, clear, steady, and shadowed, that held him. "I was told you found my girls," she said. Her voice was low, almost hesitant, but without tremor. From behind him, a small voice stirred. "Mama?" The little one had woken, rubbing her eyes. She sat up, the quilt sliding from her shoulders. The woman stepped forward, relief loosening her posture for the briefest moment as both girls ran to her. She dropped to her knees in the doorway, gathering them in with arms that trembled now, pressing her face into their hair as if to be sure they were real. When she looked back up at Adam, there was something guarded in her expression again, though gratitude softened it. "I owe you more than I can say," she murmured. Her fingers brushed over the girls' backs, steadying them. Adam nodded, feeling the air between them turn heavier with something unspoken. The woman's gaze held his a moment longer. Then she drew a breath that seemed to cost her. "I came," she said quietly, "with an offer, and maybe you'll think it strange." Adam stepped back from the doorway, letting the woman and her daughters cross the threshold. The cold seemed to cling to them, riding in on their coats and hair. He closed the door against the pale spring wind, its whistle cutting off into a muffled hush. The fire's warmth reached toward them, drawing steam from their damp hems. The girls clung close to her, Hannah at her side, Helena's small fingers twisted in the folds of her patch coat. The woman eased them toward the hearth without a word from him, as if the space was already familiar by instinct. Her gaze traveled over the cabin, sparse shelves, a scarred table, the narrow bed curtained by a wool blanket, before returning to him. Her eyes didn't wander after that. "You must be Adam Mercer," she said quietly. "I'm Eliza Wickham." He nodded, leaning the rifle back in its place. "They didn't say your name." She looked down at her girls. "You both warm enough now." Hannah nodded, still watching Adam from under lowered brows. Helena smiled faintly before burying her face in her mother's coat. "I wanted to thank you," Eliza said. "They were too far from home. I should have been here sooner." She hesitated, her voice thinning. "We had a scare yesterday. Coyotes. I sent them toward the old road to fetch help. I didn't know if," she broke off, tightening her hold on Helena's shoulder. "You saved them." Adam didn't answer right away. Gratitude from strangers always sat uneasy with him. "Wasn't anything I wouldn't have done for any child," he said finally. Her gaze flickered, as if measuring him against something she'd heard or hoped. Then she took a step closer, the girls still pressed close. "That's not the only reason I came." He waited, her breath clouded in the cool draft from the door seam. "We've nothing left. The winter stripped us near to the bone. Our cabin's roof sags under snowmelt. I can't keep food on the table for the girls and patch walls at the same time. I'm not here to beg." Her chin lifted slightly, though her fingers knotted together. "I came with an offer." Something in her tone made the air seem taut. "What kind of offer?" he asked. "I can work," she said. "I can cook, keep house, mend clothes, tend a garden when the ground's ready. The girls can help some. We don't take much room. If you'll give us a place to stay, I'll see your home's kept the way a home ought to be. We'd earn our keep." The cabin was quiet except for the faint hiss of the fire. Adam's eyes moved from her face to the children, then back. She met his look without flinching, but there was something in her posture, shoulders squared against a blow that might come. "You'd work for me," he said slowly, "in exchange for board." Her lips pressed together, then parted. "Yes." "You've kin in town?" No, a single word, but the way it left her mouth told him the matter was closed. He let the silence stretch. He was not a man given to rash welcomes. Even the sound of another set of boots in his home had become foreign since the day the ground closed over his wife. Still, the thought of sending them back into the thin, bitter light outside settled wrong in his chest. "You'd have to put up with a long ride to town for supplies," he said at last. "And this place is quiet. Maybe too quiet for little ones." Hannah's voice came, soft but certain. "We like quiet." It was the first she'd spoken since they came in, and the weight of her tone sounded older than her years. Adam studied the girl for a beat, then looked to Eliza. "Stay the night. We'll talk come morning." Eliza's breath left her in a slow exhale, relief faint but visible. She nodded, and the stiffness in her hands eased just enough for her to smooth Helena's hair. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." "Adam," he corrected. She gave the smallest of smiles before guiding the girls toward the table. He ladled out what was left of last night's stew, the scent of venison and onion filling the space between them. They ate quietly, the scrape of spoons against tin mingling with the pop of resin in the firewood. Afterward, Eliza gathered the bowls without asking, rinsing them in warm water from the kettle. Her movements were practiced, precise, like someone used to making herself useful in another's home. The girls settled near the hearth again, drowsy from the heat and full bellies. "You've lived here long?" she asked, keeping her voice low so as not to wake them. 10 years. Built it with my own hands." He didn't add that those hands had held a different life once, before the quiet. She nodded, as if filing away the measure of the man. "I've been on my own since autumn," she said after a moment. "The snow came early. We managed, but..." Her eyes shifted toward the sleeping girls. "This winter wasn't meant for widows." He caught the edge in her voice, the way the word widow landed heavy, not as a plea for pity, but as a plain truth she'd carried too long. "Tomorrow," Adam said, "you tell me what you'll need if you stay. We'll see what can be done." Her gaze held his, searching for something there. Perhaps she found it, because she gave a small nod and pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Night settled over the hills, the cabin lit only by the fire's glow. The wind outside rattled a loose shutter, but inside there was stillness. Adam stretched out in the rocker, half dozing, listening to the soft breaths of the three across the room. When the embers dimmed, he laid another log on the fire. As he straightened, he caught sight of Eliza watching him from her bedroll, her eyes steady but unreadable. She didn't look away until his shadow broke across the wall between them. Near dawn, he woke to the sound of quiet movement. Eliza was at the table, hair unbound, pouring water from the kettle into a basin. She glanced up, startled but not guilty, then returned to washing the girls' stockings. Steam rose from the water, curling in the cool air. "You could have waited," he said. "They'll dry by the time they're up." She wrung out the cloth, her fingers red from heat and soap. "We'll be ready to talk after breakfast." He studied her for a long moment, seeing not just the wear of a hard winter, but the grit that had kept her standing through it. She didn't avert her eyes, and in that shared look, some unspoken understanding passed between them. Outside, the snowfields caught the first threads of sunlight, the crust glinting like glass. Adam moved to stoke the fire higher, the scent of smoke curling upward. The day would bring its own reckonings. And from the way Eliza squared her shoulders, he knew her offer was only the start of something neither of them could yet name. In the weeks that followed her offer, Eliza and the girls became part of the cabin's rhythm, as if they'd always been meant to. Adam did not announce that they could stay. He simply began making room for them, sliding his extra coat to a lower peg, so Eliza's could hang beside it, clearing space on the shelves for jars she scrubbed clean and filled with dried beans. Mornings began with the hiss of coffee and the sound of Eliza moving quietly through the kitchen corner. She had a way of making even plain work look sure and dignified, sewing on a patch with even stitches, lifting a skillet with a certain steadiness in her wrist. The girls took their small chores seriously. Helena fed the hens with a solemnity rare for her age, while Hannah swept the porch boards until the dust rose in pale motes. Adam found himself listening for these sounds when he was out mending fences or checking the creek. They threaded into the stillness of the place, making it less hollow. He didn't speak of it, but he noticed how the silence after their laughter felt heavier than before they'd come. On their first trip to town together, the change in his life was made visible. They arrived with the wagon bed half full of flour, salt, and a roll of cloth Eliza had chosen for dresses. The boardwalk creaked under their boots as they stepped down. Hannah kept one hand on her mother's skirt. Helena trotted ahead until Adam called her back with a quiet word. He could feel eyes on them. Whispers moved like wind through dry grass, low voices carrying just enough to reach him. A man at the mercantile door glanced from Eliza to Adam, then looked away with a smirk he didn't bother to hide. Two women by the post office leaned their heads together. Eliza's jaw tightened, but her gaze stayed forward. Inside, she stood beside him as he paid for the supplies, her shoulders square. Helena touched a bolt of faded blue calico and looked up with pleading eyes. Adam added it to the order without comment. Eliza's glance at him was brief, but held something he couldn't name. Back at the wagon, he loaded the goods while Eliza settled the girls on the bench. The road home was quiet except for the squeak of the harness and the occasional call of a raven overhead. Halfway back, Eliza spoke. "They'll talk no matter what we do." Adam kept his eyes on the rutted trail. "Let M. The land doesn't care." Her mouth softened, though her hands stayed knotted in her lap. "The land doesn't know, but people can make life small if they want to." He didn't answer, but the thought stayed with him. Work bound them together more than talk did. They hauled wood from the shed to the porch, mucked the barn, and cleared debris where the wind had thrown branches down. Eliza worked until her hair stuck to her temples, her palms chapped from cold water. She never asked for help with her share, though Adam often found a way to be nearby when the lifting grew heavy. One afternoon, he caught sight of her in the yard, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hanging washed clothes on the line strung between two young aspens. The wind tugged at her hair, lifting strands across her cheek. For a moment, the scene was so quiet, so ordinary, it unsettled him. He'd forgotten what it looked like to have a woman's presence shape the space between walls and sky. The girls grew bolder with him in small ways. Hannah would sometimes bring him a cup of water while he worked, setting it down without speaking, but standing near until he drank. Helena began leaving her carved wooden horse on the porch rail for him to find, always pretending it had been lost there. In the evenings, after the girls were asleep, Adam and Eliza would sit by the fire, sometimes with mending in her lap, sometimes with the creak of his rocker the only sound. It was in these hours that the quiet between them shifted. She began to ask him about the land, the seasons, how he managed the cattle in deep snow. He answered simply, but he saw how she listened, how her eyes followed his hands when he gestured. Late one night, he woke to the sound of soft footsteps. Eliza stood by the window, her shawl pulled tight, staring out into the pale light of a half-moon on snow. Her face was still, but her eyes glistened. He didn't speak. He only noted the set of her shoulders, as if she were holding back a weight too private to name. When she turned, she startled slightly to find him awake, then offered a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes before returning to her bedroll. As the days lengthened, the first fragile shoots appeared in the thawed edges of the yard. Adam took the girls down to the creek to show them where the ice had broken, water rushing beneath. Helena's laugh at the spray catching her mitten made him glance up toward the cabin. Eliza stood in the doorway, watching them, one hand braced against a frame. For the briefest moment, her expression was unguarded, something warm, almost tender. But she turned away before he could be sure. The talk in town hadn't stopped. On his next supply trip alone, Adam heard a man at the counter remark, "Mercer's got himself company these days." The tone made clear what the words left unsaid. Adam paid for his goods and left without reply, but the heat in his jaw lingered all the way home. That evening, he found Eliza at the table, darning one of Hannah's stockings. He set the sack of supplies down and hesitated before speaking. "They're still talking." Her needle paused mid-stitch. "I know." He waited for her to say more, but she tied off the thread and reached for the next ear. Her calm was not the absence of feeling, it was the endurance of it. The cabin felt smaller that night. The girls slept close together, Eliza curled beside them. Adam sat long at the fire, listening to the wind rise outside, thinking of the way her eyes had met his when she'd said she could work for her keep. Not pleading, just setting her terms in a world that rarely gave women such a chance. The next morning, they worked side by side in the yard, stacking wood. She moved with a quiet efficiency, never rushing, never wasting motion. At one point, she stopped to brush air from her eyes, leaving a smudge of ash across her cheek. Adam reached without thinking, brushing it away with the back of his knuckle. She froze, breath-catching. His hand fell back, and they both turned to the work without a word, but the air between them held a new charge. As the sun slid behind the ridge, the wind carried the scent of wet pine and distant snowmelt. The girls chased each other around the yard, their laughter high and bright. Eliza watched them, her hands wrapped around her elbows. Adam stood a pace away, feeling the pull of words he didn't yet know how to shape. That night, as the fire burned low, Hannah stirred from her bedroll and crossed the room to stand beside him. "Mama says we can stay here if you want us," she whispered. "Do you?" Her eyes, solemn in the firelight, searched his face. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Eliza's voice came from the shadows behind her, steady and quiet. That's not for him to answer tonight. The sky had been clear that morning, the kind of pale, brittle blue that comes after a hard freeze. By noon, clouds were shouldering in from the west, slow at first, then thickening into a wall that blotted out the sun. Adam knew the look of it. Spring storms could be meaner than midwinter ones, turning rain to sleet and back again before a man could get the stock sheltered. He'd been repairing the south fence when the first flakes began to swirl, fine and fast. The wind sharpened, cutting through his coat as he gathered tools into the sled. By the time he reached the yard, the snow was coming in sideways, whiting out the ridge beyond the creek. Eliza stood on the porch, shawl clutched tight. The girls pressed against her skirts. "They were calling for sun," she said, her voice raised over the gust. Adam led the mare into the barn. "Spring lies," he called back. "Get more wood in. We might be shut in a few days." Inside, the air turned dim and close. The storm rattled the shutters, a restless animal circling the walls. Eliza moved quickly, stacking kindling by the hearth, setting beans to soak, checking the latch on the pantry window. The girls helped as they could, Helena ferrying small armfuls of split logs from the stack, Hannah keeping the fire fed until it roared. By evening, the cabin felt smaller, the sound of the wind swelling until it filled every corner. Snow hissed against the roof. The oil lamp threw long shadows on the walls, wavering with each gust. Adam sat near the door, mending a halter, his ears tuned to the barn. The livestock would be uneasy. That night, the storm deepened. The wind's voice turned wild, rising and dropping in sudden howls. In her sleep, Hannah whimpered, the sound thin and frightened. Eliza went to her, smoothing her hair, whispering low until her breathing slowed. Adam watched from a rocker, something tightening in his chest at the sight of the girl's small hand gripping her mother's. Near midnight, a thud came from outside, the heavy, offbeat sound of something shifting where it shouldn't. Adam set down his work, pulling on his coat. "Stay inside," he said. Eliza was already rising. "What is it?" "Barn door, maybe." She crossed to him, the lamplight catching the worry in her eyes. "Don't," she stopped herself, pressing her lips together. "Be careful." Outside, the cold hit like a blow. Snow stung his face, the wind tearing at his coat. The barn loomed as a shadow in the white. The main door was straining against its latch, the wind threatening to wrench it free. Adam wrestled it back into place, wedging a board against it. The mare snorted from her stall, hooves shifting on the straw. When he turned for the cabin, the storm had thickened into a white wall. The path he'd just walked was already gone. He bent into the wind, each step an effort. He didn't see Eliza until she was almost on him. Her shawl whipped half off her shoulders, snow in her hair. "You fool," she shouted over the gale. "You could have been lost." He grabbed her arm, pulling her close enough to be heard. "I told you to stay inside. And I told you," her voice caught, raw with more than cold. "Don't leave them fatherless again." The words stopped him. In the fury of wind and snow, they hung between them, stark and unsoftened. Her breath came hard, her eyes fierce even as they glistened. He didn't answer, only tightened his grip and led her toward the glow of the cabin window. Inside, the girls were huddled under blankets, watching the door as if willing them to return. Helena slid down from a chair and ran to them, wrapping both arms around Eliza's legs. Adam shut the door against the storm and dropped the bar into place. The fire was burning high. Its heat hit his frozen face with a sting. They settled again, though the cabin felt tighter now, the air thick with what had been said. Eliza busied herself with the girls, but Adam caught her glancing at him when she thought he wasn't looking. Morning brought no calm. Snow still drove against the glass, the wind scouring the walls. Supplies would hold, but tempers could fray in close quarters. The girls played on the floor with carved animals, their laughter brief and bright before fading into whispers. Adam took to sharpening tools at the table, the scrape of steel on stone steady as a heartbeat. Eliza moved between chores with quiet precision, mending a shirt, stirring the beans, brushing melting snow from the girls' coats where they'd hung by the hearth. At one point, she paused beside him, laying a folded shirt on the table. "You've been good to us," she said, her tone low. "Better than most would." He set the whetstone down. "I don't see it as charity." "I know. That's why it matters." Her eyes held his for a long moment before she turned back to her work. By the third night, the wind had eased, but the snow lay heavy, piled high against the door. Adam and Hannah worked together to clear it, shoveling until the first gray of dawn reached over the ridge. The air smelled sharp and clean. From the barn came the muffled sound of the mare nickering. Inside, Eliza was spooning steaming beans into bowls. She looked up when they came in, a rare smile tugging at her mouth. "You'll eat before you fall over." Adam took the bowl, the warmth seeping into his hands. Across the table, Hannah leaned against her mother, her eyes half closed from weariness. Helena chattered softly, telling him about a bird she'd seen in the snow. The storm had pressed them together in ways the slow days had not. There had been no room for distance when the wind rattled the walls and the white closed in. Adam felt the truth of it as he watched Eliza move, her hair escaping its knot, her hand steady on Helena's back. That night, with the girls asleep, he found her at the window again, looking out at the still world. Moonlight silvered the drifts, the land smooth and unbroken. She didn't turn when he stepped beside her. "You meant what you said," he murmured. She nodded, eyes still on the snow. "I've seen what it does. Losing someone. I won't have them go through it again if I can stop it." He watched her profile in the pale light, the quiet strength there. The storm had passed, but something between them had shifted, as sure as the snow reshaping the land outside. Eliza's hand rested lightly on the sill, close enough that he could have covered it with his own. He didn't. Not yet. But the space between their hands felt charged, like the air before lightning. From behind them, a floorboard creaked. Hannah stood in the half-light, blanket around her shoulders, her small voice breaking the stillness. "Is Mama staying here forever?" The thaw came slow, reluctant, as if winter still had its hands on the land. Ice loosened along the creek first, water flashing bright between black stones. The snowbanks shrank into ragged shapes, their edges melting into rivulets that laced the yard. Each day, the air smelled a little different, less of cold iron, more of pine sap and wet soil. Adam worked the fence line in a light coat now, boots sinking in the softening ground. From the yard, he could hear Eliza's voice calling the girls in from play. It had changed since the first days, a little fuller, carrying a note of ease. He liked the sound of it in a way that unsettled him. Life inside the cabin had shifted without anyone naming it. Eliza no longer moved like a guest. Her shawl hung on the same peg each night. Her sewing basket sat by the hearth. The girls kept a corner for their carved animals, a patch of floor no one stepped on without care. Adam found his chair already warm in the evenings, Eliza having sat there earlier with her mending. They still spoke little about the town, but the whispers had reached him again. A man at the mill had asked if Adam planned to keep his company long. Adam's answer had been a level stare until the man looked away. That evening, he mentioned it to Eliza while she kneaded bread at the table. "They'll think what they want," she said, dusting flour from her hands. "We can't live by their stories. It doesn't trouble you?" Her gaze met his. "It used to, but trouble won't feed the girls or keep the roof sound. I care more about what's inside these walls." He held her eyes a beat longer than needed before nodding. One afternoon, while mending tack in the barn, he heard Helena's laughter burst out in high, bright notes. Stepping outside, he saw the girls chasing each other between patches of snow, skirts flying. Eliza leaned against the fence, hair loose in the wind, watching them. She glanced toward him, and this time didn't turn away. Something passed between them, quiet, steady, as sure as the turning of a season. The turning came quicker than he expected. A man from town rode up one morning, hat in hand, his horse blowing steam. He brought news in a careful voice. Some said Adam's arrangement was improper. A few wondered if the girls were his responsibility at all. Adam listened without answering, his hand still on the post he'd been setting. When the man left, the air felt thick with more than the smell of thawing earth. Inside, Eliza was at the table with the girls, braiding Helena's hair. "They're starting to look this way," he told her. Her fingers stilled in the braid. "Then maybe we should go before it gets worse." He felt the words like a stone in the gut. "And go where?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Someplace we can be quiet again. You've been quiet too long." His voice was low, rougher than he meant. Her eyes lifted to his. "And what would you have me do?" The answer rose before he could stop it. "Stay." The word hung there, startling them both. That night, he lay awake listening to the wind in the eaves, thinking of what staying would mean. Not just shelter and meals and work shared. It was the sound of the girls' laughter in the yard, the sight of Eliza's hands smoothing a quilt, the way she had stood beside him in the storm without turning back. Morning came gold and soft, the snow nearly gone from the meadow. Adam went to the small chest beneath his bed and lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was his mother's wedding band, a plain gold circle, worn thin but still whole. He carried it in his pocket all day, its weight a constant reminder. Eliza was hanging laundry when he crossed the yard. The wind caught the damp cloth, snapping it like sails. She looked at him over the line, eyes narrowing against the light. "I've been thinking on your offer," he said. Her brows knit slightly. "My offer?" "To work for your keep, to earn a place here." He took the ring from his pocket, holding it in his palm. "I've got a better one." Her gaze dropped to the ring, then back to him. The wind lifted a strand of hair across her cheek. "You mean?" "I mean I want you here, not as my help, as my wife." Her breath caught, her hands still holding the clothespin. For a moment, she looked away toward the hills, as if steadying herself. When she turned back, her eyes were bright. "Adam, are you sure?" "I've been sure a while. Just didn't know how to say it." The girls' voices carried from the porch, calling for her. She glanced their way, then stepped around the line toward him. Her hand came up to touch the ring in his palm, her fingers brushing his. "If I say yes," she murmured, "it's for life. No turning back." He closed her fingers over the ring. "That's the only way I'd want it." Her answer was a quiet nod, but her eyes held the kind of light that didn't need more words. They married a week later in the meadow, the thaw turning the ground soft underfoot. The girls scattered early wildflowers in the breeze, their laughter carrying to the tree line. Adam stood with Eliza beside him, the sun warm on their faces, and felt the last hard edge of winter ease inside him. As the small gathering from town drifted away, he stayed beside her, their hands linked. The girls danced ahead toward the cabin, skirts swaying. Eliza leaned close enough for her shoulder to rest against his. "This feels like home," she said. He looked at her, the weight of the ring on her hand catching the light, and knew she was right. The thaw had left the land marked with rivulets and soft places, the scars of winter visible, but healing. Inside the cabin, the air was warm, the table set for 4. For the first time in years, Adam thought of the seasons ahead without dread, each one holding a place for all of them. That night, as the fire burned low and the girls slept, Eliza sat across from him, her hair loose, eyes steady. "You know they'll keep talking," she said. "Let them," he replied. "They don't know the half of it." Her smile was small but certain, the kind that comes from choosing something with both hands. Outside, the last of the snow slid from the roof in a slow, heavy sheet, landing with a soft thud. The sound made him think of doors closing, of storms finally spent. And in the quiet after, with the light pooling warm between them, Adam felt the truth settle deep. The storm had given him a family, and the thaw had made them his for good.